All right, we're going to get rocking and rolling here. All right, I'm going to do some announcements first before I introduce Marnie. I want to welcome everyone. My name is Donna Heitmanick. I run the Science of Reading Facebook page. I am very glad you are here. We had a really good, wow, 97 participants. Yay, this is great. Things have not been good lately, so this is really wonderful. Just by way of telling you, we have another event next week called Sight Word Instruction. And that's with Svetlana. And I'm trying to remember her last name. I'm drawing a blank right now. And she will be, she has a PhD, and her work was basically on acquiring sight words. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting. And then on February 15th and 29th, we have a two-part series, how to evaluate your students' writing. Now, I attended an IDA conference in October, and I attended that session, and I was blown away with the content of this session. So this one is a paid event. It's only $15. So I'd like for you to look into that if you're interested. We'd love to have you. And you will be able to do a writing sample with your students and bring it in and use that as a, a way to critique your students' writing. So you'll learn from this session. So here we go for tonight's session. Marnie Ginsberg and I go way back, like what, 4 years now?
It's a long time in SOR world.
It really is, right? We're all kind of learning how to do all this together. So Marnie is the founder. Dr. Marnie Ginsberg is the founder of Reading Simplified, whose mission is to support busy, overwhelmed teachers learn a research-based system of effective and efficient instruction that accelerates all students' reading achievement. Marnie's surprise at finding so many of the middle school students in her classroom reading well below their grade spurred a passion for finding and disseminating solutions. What followed included private tutoring, university research, the creation of an evidence-based reading program, and ultimately the development of Reading Simplified. And I think tonight's presentation, you are going to learn a lot. It's going to be very interesting. And I'm so glad you agreed to do this, Marnie, and take it away.
Why, thank you. I'm so honored, and I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity. And I'm thankful to all of you who are coming on a weeknight, many of you, or good morning to all of our Australia people. I'm going to try to jump right in because actually I am squeezing a lot into this time. But I first like to know, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Secondly, can you put in the chat, have you ever heard of set for variability before? And do you even know what it means? I know this is probably a pretty sophisticated group, but if it's not something that is mainstream knowledge. Even university professors in reading may not have heard about it. So
there's some no's there.
Good. Then this is the night for you. And if it is something familiar to you, hopefully it'll reinforce your knowledge of the research and also extend how you might adapt your instruction in the classroom. So let's get right into a second decoding strategy you never heard of, set for variability. And I'm going to just share a GIF that's going to give some advice on how to give feedback at the end, if you want to stick around for that link from us. But first, let's play a game. How many of you have run across this game code called Incoherent? It's a game where you draw a card and you have to read something that's like a phrase, but it's not quite right. So you guys start playing right now, okay? Type in the chat, as soon as I put the card up, type in the chat what this phrase probably is. Can you see it? What's it going to be in the chat? I'm making sure I can see the chat. Hey, Deb, Diane, Beth, you got it. You only live once. You only live once. This is going to relate to set for variability, believe it or not. Next one. There, you got it. Okay, how about the
What?
second one?
Finally.
Can I remind everyone to be muted?
Fast typist, said Kathleen. That's right. What's the next one? Have a sauna? That's a good guess. And Diane, I think you're the first. Here we go. Check it out. Amazon Alexa. Can you see that from the Amazon Alexa?
They probably played the game before, Marnie.
And there's always
Yeah, right?
excuses that we make for ourselves. I'm not very good at this game, turns out. So what you are all doing is a type of set for variability. You are hearing something that's not quite right. It's not a meaningful phrase the way you first decoded it. And then your brain is trying to transform it into something that's actually meaningful. And that is set for variability, taking something that's not quite right. In the case of reading, a mispronunciation, and correcting it so that it is a real word. That's what we're going to be talking about. Technically, a definition might be the skill a reader uses to transform a pronunciation error into the correctly decoded form. Another definition that might be easy thing to hook on to is mispronunciation correction. Have you seen kids do this? They come to the word said, they say said, they correct it, and they come up with said. That's using set for variability. It's a skill a good reader needs. Here's where we're headed today. I would like to persuade you that set for variability, based on the research, is strongly related to many word reading measures. It's also an important second step in the decoding process, or at least tentatively that seems to be the case, where all the research is heading. It's newer research. And also as a result of some of these insights from research, our instruction may need to adjust in light of the set for variability findings. And this is a really big deal to me, this research. When I first started my doctorate at the University of North Carolina in the early 2000s, I had been reading about early word reading acquisition. I'd been reading a lot about phonemic awareness, and everything about word reading, how children acquire it, had its tentacles in phonemic awareness. You've been hearing about phonemic awareness, whether you're brand new to the science of reading movement or it's old hat to you, you know about the importance, the predictive nature of phonemic awareness, and how essential it is for just unlocking the code for kids. And so it was everywhere in the research. You couldn't find a study that didn't have that, at least even if it wasn't the primary focus of the study, it would still include it. Well, we've gone several years. It's over 2 decades since I started, and it's just in the last 3 years, really, there's an explosion of interest in set for variability because they're discovering some things that are very similar in the sense of how big of a deal it was for phonemic awareness to impact our thinking about how kids learn to read. So this is new and fresh stuff. A lot of the texts that you will see on the general market will not talk about set for variability because it's just so brand new. I was really pleased when Berkins and Yates included it in their book, but very few people have. And so you're on the cutting edge by being here. I really want to talk about the past. I hope it's purposeful because I'm just trying to give you this context now. Like you're probably wondering, why haven't I heard about it? Why don't I see it in more books? What does this have to do with my curriculum that I'm teaching on Monday? I'm trying to position things in terms of how this research has really just taken off. It's really a new idea in general. And so we're going to go over the research and then we'll dive into how it might impact us as teachers. This is what historically we have had as a model of how kids learn to read. If we didn't have the 3 cueing model and we had one that's more focused on how kids learn to read based on systematic phonics, we would probably have this model, right? Recognize letter sounds, then you got to blend them, then there's the word. How many of you have a reading program that basically implies this or explicitly teaches this is what you do? This is the equation. Does that ring a bell? Martha, Sophie, Jennifer. Yes. Okay. So, for instance, you can see this on the IES practice guide. Teach student to blend letter sounds and sound spelling patterns from left to right within a word to pronounce a recognizable pronunciation. That's the assumption that if you can know the letter sounds and you blend, then you'll come up with a recognizable pronunciation. But as we all know, kids sometimes don't, whether they don't have the phonics knowledge or it's just a tricky word. They're going to mispronounce it. What do we do then? That's where set for variability comes into play. So when we're talking about blending,
let's put these sounds together.
It's really important to use a really efficient strategy. And Gonzalez, Frey, and Airy call it continuant phonation. I put this strategy, which we call a reading simplified blend as you read. I put it into the targeted reading intervention, which has that citation there with the elementary school journal. It's been in multiple studies. So in case this continuous blending or continuant phonation concept is new to you, I just want to show this really quickly, even though it's not the core of what we're talking about, but it really relates directly to set for variability because we're talking about, I'm going to little foreshadowing. These are the two most important decoding strategies, blending, and then we'll get to set for variability. So let's see, can you, fingers crossed, can you hear this? Might need to turn it up. Donna, can you let me know?
Let's put these sounds together.
Good.
Okay, what are the first two sounds? Put them together. Put all three together. Nice. Okay, great job. You put the sounds together. Now say each sound.
So that was him doing the blend as you read, not going what word? A segmented approach, but continually dragging sounds together. That's a good number of studies now show us that that's more efficient for blending. But basically what I'm trying to send you home with today, this is it. This is a little math formula. This is the only math I'm going to be able to do today. Instead of just having the three elements of the letter sounds plus blending equals the word, let's fold in another variable. And that is, can your students use the set for variability strategy when they get to the word said and they read it as said? Can they realize that's not a word and adjust? That's a strategy, right? Just like putting the sounds together, slap, slap. That's a strategy. These are both the most important decoding strategy, in my opinion, especially for single syllable words. In fact, that's what Elbro and his colleagues mention in one of the earlier, more modern studies. Because I'm going to show you like some stuff that's a while back. And then in the modern day, their title basically was set for variability, a second step in word decoding. What do we do when they mispronounce it? So let's see an example of set for variability. This is a super short example of a girl coming across the word guess. She's going to go g, and then I think in her mind she reads the rest, but she doesn't say it out loud. And then she flips into the word guess. So you might need to turn it up to hear this.
No. You cannot look. Guess.
Nice figuring out there. Guess. That was so cool to me that she could do all that work. She was looking at the print and connecting it to meaning and she knew that wasn't going to make a word. So she adjusted. So where did this all come from? As early as 1975 in a very influential reading text at the time, although it's influential for researchers. It didn't really much impact the classroom as far as I can tell. They said from a study that these results suggest that teaching children initially to expect one-to-one constant mappings of letters to sounds is not an effective way to promote transfer and decoding at later stages of learning to read. The nature of the correspondence system should be revealed as soon as possible if transfer is to be optimized. This is also a little foreshadowing of some of my recommendations later. So this was something that they're warning us about, but really most of the phonics programs that have been established since this time don't follow this advice. In my observation, they do spend a lot of time one-to-one mapping, and then uh-oh, you get into the second year or the third year and kids aren't very flexible. They don't necessarily have good set for variability skills. So maybe we can adjust our approach. Then we saw a little later, not much on the scene about this concept, but Vanetsky, in a very influential text, The American Way of Spelling, talks about this. He refers back to Gibson 11, and he says, if one pronunciation does not produce a known word that makes sense for the context, a child has to try a different pronunciation, and we should teach them this. Okay, sounds good, but not many experiments. And so finally, in the more of a modern era, we had something that kind of sparked, I think, this interest, that Tunmer and Chapman came up with a way to actually measure set for variability. A researcher can't say this is what is doing the thing in the outcome unless the researcher can isolate that component. And so they operationalized set for variability, just like we did at the beginning with that game, Incoherent. So the test would be exclusively oral. So I'm going to say to you, Alex is saying words funny. I mean, he might say the word like this, mother. Well, what word do you think it is? Mother. Oh, Alex is saying this word funny. What do you think it is? Breakfast. Breakfast. Okay. That's how they operationalize it. This skill is a big deal. And according to several studies that have come out, mostly in the last 5 years. So that activity that we just did, researchers can plug it into an equation with lots of other reading data, and it will predict general word reading. It will also predict irregular word reading and regular words specifically. Now, I want to ask you, what do you think, based on what you've been observing about doing this activity, what do you think set for variability is most related to? Like, what skills, cognitive skills, what does it seem like it's really closely related to? Yes, Laura, I think it would be similar. There's some people are talking about sorting and oral language or vocabulary. That's what I wanted to get at, was I thought most of the time I hear people think it's oral language vocabulary, and it's certainly part of it. But check this fourth thing out that set for variability predicts. Look down at their bottom, number 4. Set for variability predicts a child's ability to read nonsense words. What does nonsense words have to do with vocabulary? Not that much. So there's something else going on here, and it's not just language. It's much, in my opinion, it's much more tightly aligned to orthographic knowledge. So I really recommend this study in 2022, Stacy and her colleagues. They were trying to just explain what's the value in knowing about set for variability. And they said that the results suggest that set for variability accounts for a significant amount of unique variance in word reading over and above other important early predictors of reading. Comparatively, the additional variance explained by SFV. I'm not sure if SFV is easier than saying set for variability. What do you think? It was much larger than that explained by PA. When competed against other predictors of word reading, set for variability was the strongest predictor, completely dominating PA, RAN or rapid automatized naming, vocabulary, and attention statistically. This is with a slightly older group of kids, the youngest being in 2nd grade. Still, like I said at the beginning of the talk, based on how dominant phonemic awareness is for helping kids learn to read, this is amazing that it kind of beats it out. They continued in their analysis to find that it accounted for 15% unique variance in word reading above and beyond other predictors, whereas phonological awareness accounted for only 1%. That's a pretty big difference in variance. In other words, how much there's an association and relationship between them. And here's some correlations to think about. How is set for variability correlated with phonemic awareness, or I can't remember this phonological awareness measure, but it's 0.66, pretty strong measure, but it's not as strong as it's stronger than it is for vocab, 0.5. And then there's 0.33. You got to pay attention. If I'm going to throw that Hamasana at you, you got to pay attention, but it's not as big of a connection as PA. But guess what's the biggest connection? Again, it's not vocabulary, it's word identification. So what it seems to me like we're really tracking is that skill, even though it's oral, is highly associated with word reading. And some kids who are, and us adults, anyone who is good at word reading is likely going to be good at set for variability, even though set for variability is operationalized as an oral only task. So what's going on when the reader is doing this set for variability task? And I think it's really important to consider set for variability in light of the triangle model of word reading. You've got semantics or meaning interacting with phonology or sound, and orthography or spelling. It's in the intersection of those three elements of the language and literacy systems of the brain that we're doing this processing. In Seidenberg and McClellan's work, they said it's not just like one direct route between semantics and phonology, but there's these intersections of things that are kind of cleaning up where the brain may be immediately processing something and they need a little second to figure something out. So that phonological cleanup and Kearns' and colleagues' study, they think that there's a lot of that phonological element in set for variability. It's a process that allows readers to take the output of phonological recoding. In other words, say I looked at SAID and I said SAID. I assembled that using PA skills and I tested against a phonological lexicon, my vocabulary, and using sublexical and semantic knowledge. All of this occurs while retaining the output of recoding. So I'm thinking about SAID and sustaining attention to engage this process. Set for variability connects the phonological processes, those that lead to a recoding, changing it up, and the semantic processes, those involved in locating lexical or word-based entries, with the success of all of this depending on a working memory system. So in other words, there's a lot going on there, but definitely phonology is what is helping you work the system. And this was in 2016, but then in Stacy, just a couple years later, said, well, we agree, and there's even more to it. It's probably mostly orthography. In the middle there, thus we speculate there is an orthographic component having to do with spelling associated with reading experience to the set for variability task, moving beyond mere phonological assembly and lexical testing, which links this task to word and non-word reading skill above and beyond the level of straight phonological processing. So that's again to tie back to the correlation of set for variability is almost 0.8 with word identification. That's a very high correlation. So that's the background of the research about the importance of set for variability, why I'm kind of excited about it. And then the next thing, besides knowing, well, yeah, it predicts something, then the next thing practically is, well, okay, it predicts something, but can you actually change a student's ability in it? And here we're in kind of, I'd say, tentative waters. So this was one of the first studies by Zipke. She just did 5 short lessons on set for variability and guided reading practice with 15 beginning readers. When kids got coached on how to do set for variability, they tried that strategy more often, and that was good, but it didn't actually improve their reading achievement. These were the general prompts. These are very similar to what I've been teaching at Reading Simplified and also at the targeted reintervention, which I developed a while back. Is there another way to say that? What other sounds does that letter make? Try saying it another way. Do you know another sound for that letter? What's another word that sounds something like that? Okay, so it's just a lot of variations of try again. But again, it was good to see that they were like trying the strategy more, but they weren't, it didn't result in better reading achievement, but it was a very short study. Dyson did something a little bit more complex, more students and it was 4 weeks, a little longer. Notice their ages 5 through 7. And she did set for variability and her colleagues, they did set for variability and vocabulary instruction. Because I think at this time it was more thought to be vocabulary. It did yield effects for the trained words, but again, it didn't transfer over to like an untrained, like a standardized test. Notice how they coached on the left there. Say the word out loud. Decide if you've read or heard that word before. Think of a word that sounds like the word you are reading. choose a word that that sounds familiar, check to see if it makes sense. We're doing things like this already, aren't we? To some extent, maybe we want to fold it in a little bit more. Then another element of her intervention was more vocabulary. I don't think that's as important for this skill specifically because it's so much more tightly tied to word ID. But they found the current study shows that it is relatively easy to teach children strategies that allow them to correct their mispronunciation of irregular words. We still just don't have a knock it out of the park study that really made dramatic changes, but each of these are building upon one another. Then Savage and his colleagues did something more complex. They did an experiment of direct mapping and set for variability with a control group of just best practices. So because that intervention was a couple different things, it's not as easy to draw conclusions, but the direct mapping was like, let me teach you the OW sound and now go read text, like authentic text that happen to have a lot of OW sounds in it or spellings. And so this combination intervention showed immediate higher word reading and spelling. And it even showed some benefits in post-test. But like I said, it wasn't really just pulling out purely set for variability because they were doing a combo effect. Kathleen, what if a child blends a word wrong at first, but the next word that comes out is correctly pronounced? If you're talking like if they fix it, then that's good. They just did that. They did that strategy, but I'm not sure if I'm getting your question right. So and in their direct mapping and intervention, they also talked about a strategy of how to flip the vowel. So if they taught OW, they would say, maybe sometimes you're going to need to do O, sometimes you're going to need to do ow. Another really influential study, well, I should say another study from some influential researchers, included Stacy, who's been doing a lot of research on set for variability, but also Maureen Lovett's work has been going on for many years, teaching strategic ways of teaching decoding, among other things. And so in this study, they did the vowel alert strategy using, the stop sign. And so they'd prompt something like stop at the vowel when you're in SoR or red light, be careful and try both vowel sounds, ow or o, which is a yellow light, and go when you get the correct word. That's a green light. And so they did compared to a traditional phonics program that didn't have that emphasis on variable vowels, these students did better with the variable vowels. Okay, that's encouraging, but there wasn't much of both interventions on standardized tests, except for that one thing on how to do variable vowels. They didn't really look that much different. I think we need to have some better interventions, frankly, on this. And then finally, Colin Brander and her colleagues did a test of 3 different types of intervention to teach irregular words. This 85 kids in kindergarten, they just taught 12 words. So one group got look and say, so put up the word tongue. This is the word tongue, say tongue, tongue. So it's very whole word. The look and spell would be, this is the word tongue. And I can't remember, I'm sorry. I think they probably said the sounds and connected it, sound and symbol. And then mispronunciation correction might be like if they came to the word listen and they said, okay, let's read this. List and listen. That doesn't make sense. Does that? What else could it be? And then they told the kids, oh, this is listen. And the kids agreed. So that would be the third condition. And across those 3 conditions, this is what they found. Look and spell and mispronunciation correction, the last 2 that I talked about, they did do better than look and say and the control on trained words, but nothing really was better for untrained words like a standardized test. And interestingly, look and say, look and spell, I typed that wrong. That second category, I'm sorry, it should be look and spell and mispronunciation correction were not different. So they were both analyzing inside parts of word. Here's an example of the word wash. This is what they would have done with the script for that intervention. Okay, I'll sound out the word ash, wash, and I'm pointing it to each one. You sound it out with me. Ash. Is wash a word you know? No, wash is not a real word. So, and then the teacher tells you, so wash is not a real word, but it sounds a bit like a word you know. Just think about it. Don't tell me. The word is actually wash. Wash. Can you say it? Good job. Say it again. Wash. The word is wash. Sometimes we sound out blah, blah, blah. So they're coaching them in this process, but they're so focused on modeling. I'm thinking when I read this, who's doing the work in that intervention?
Mhm.
The teacher was doing most of the work. And did the kid have to think about, okay, how am I going to fix? I mean, maybe they were thinking wash to wash. But if they had kind of turned their brain off, there's no trigger to do that. And so I'm hoping that that's where the intervention research will go now for set for variability, moving towards let's actually not just model it, but get the kid to do the work and then coach them when they get stuck. I've been really surprised that I never heard of set for variability, but I have a lot of experience teaching kids teaching kids to learn to read. And I put in something that I would basically say is set for variability with a different name into something I created in 2005. And this is the targeted reading intervention, a diagram that was created in 2006. And the colorful line is the decoding, all the sub-skills that lead up to fluency. The gray line is high frequency word or sight word knowledge. They interact over time. Notice in highlighting there the blending skill. That's the first strategy I think that's important, that's essential for decoding. And then I added another one, even before, like I said, before I knew about set for variability. It was called try one sound. You come to the word snap, S-N-O-W, you say snow, you realize that's not a word. You got to try another, make it snow. So clinically, this diagram emerged from research, but also from my clinical experience. And now we're just seeing research to back this up. I mentioned this because the targeted reintervention does have extensive research on it, more than 10 experiments. This is one of our first ones in the elementary school journal. We got effect sizes of 0.4 to 0.7 on all 4 reading measures. And it's continued to be in leading journals. It's on the What Works Clearinghouse. We often get effect size of 0.3 to 0.7 in multiple reading outcomes for struggling readers. So it's already embedded in an experiment, this particular strategy, but this in no way proves that this approach for set for variability is the way or a good way, because the targeted reintervention is way more than just teaching set for variability. It's an entire approach to teaching kids how to read words and become fluent. And it also includes professional development. So it's not like that alone is going to tell you, yeah, this is an experiment that showed that it's possible, but it does show you it doesn't show you that it's a slam dunk, but it does show you that, at least circumstantially, that this is possibly one good way about going about it. And as I mentioned, the targeted reading interventions on the What Works Clearinghouse, multiple nonprofits have found it to be effective. There, you can see down like the bottom, like the Pew and MacArthur Foundation, evidence for ESSA. I also put the same thing into Reading Simplified, which I developed later. Over here, this is our streamlined pathway, which I know is busy if you've never seen it, but it's just one page scope and sequence. There at the bottom left is blending. That's the first decoding strategy we teach. But once kids get into multi-syllable words, we're going to put more and more energy into Flexit, which is another version of try one sound, another version of set for variability. So this is where we are in the research. I think this is not like 100% proven. Maybe nothing really ever is. But we have a good number of studies and a growing representation that there is a second decoding step. I put it into the targeted reading intervention for a reason, because you can't just blend the sounds. You're going to come to a word, blend, and get stuck. You have to have another strategy, and that's what set for variability is. So now let's think about what this means for you as a teacher or a parent. How will this model change the way you think, the way you diagnose kids' problems, the way you deliver instruction? Now we're moving into some of my my recommendations based on experience and reading of the literature. I showed you the literature that we have so far. We don't have that many experiments on this particularly, on this one strategy particularly, and they're not that strong or robust yet, but we know that the evidence is very robust that these are related. So now I'm just going to give you some of my implications for instruction. I want to go back to what we started with in 1975 when Gibson and Levin were first throwing this idea out there. The child must learn to approach the reading task with the understanding that there is variability. That is, he should acquire a set for diversity. The term's been changed to set for variability since then. Thus, for example, if more than one phoneme is represented by a single grapheme, one sound could be more than one letter or letters, the child should be introduced to both correspondences very early in training. Now, do you see that with a lot of reading programs these days? Some do. In my experience, especially for kindergarten or those who are starting out in an intervention program, they don't.
Right. So, you know,
so that's something to consider. Another thing that's pretty easy to consider is just to initially coach kids to develop a mindset for trying one sound. If it doesn't work, trying another. So this is a Reading Simplified teacher, Jess, introducing this to a child. And it's just kind of like a concept that usually you only need to introduce once, and then you just need to reinforce it as they read by simply tapping a word. Oh, what else could that be? But this is the introduction. This is one way to go about doing it. And I think it's nice.
that when we're reading, sometimes this letter says ah, right? So like that word is
Cat.
good. Do you know another sound that the letter A sometimes makes?
A.
Yeah, sometimes the letter A says its own name. It says A. So when we're reading a word and we read it with that sound, the short ah sound, sometimes we're not going to recognize that word. And what you have to do is you have to be flexible with that word. Do you know what it means to be flexible? It means sometimes it means that we can stretch our bodies, right? But it also can mean that you try a different sound, to see if that word makes sense. So will you read this word for me?
Table.
Table. Do you know that word, table?
No.
No. Can you try the other sound for A for that one?
Table.
Do you know that word?
Yeah.
Yeah, table. Nice job.
This.
Yeah, like a table, like the one we're sitting at. Yeah. Let's try another one. Let's try. This is kind of an old-fashioned word. Will you try that one?
Mason.
Mason. Is that something you know?
No.
No. Can you try it with the other sound that you know for A?
Mason.
Mason. Do you know what a mason is?
Like a stone mason.
Yeah.
So that's just the introduction. You can do it with 2 or 3 words. Then for the rest of the time you work with that child or children, just prompt them we've had here, make the vowel change. What else could it be? Often we're going to be talking about the vowel because that's where most of the trouble could be. But of course it could happen with CH because CH could be shh unexpectedly. Another thing that you can think about is actually doing an activity like what we call in Reading Simplified Flexit. So we cut up these words that all have the OW spelling, but they could be 2 sounds. So is it crowd, power, that's ow, oh, grow, oh, that's the O sound, or the low, go, cow, yeah, it's not brown. So that's just a simple way to do. Anytime you have one spelling that could be more than one sound, you can play that game, like any of the single vowels. EA can be E, A, or anything that trips them up. A good way to reinforce this kind of automaticity with playing around with vowels. But mostly, even though I think it's really important to kind of prompt them with, sometimes we're going to have to try different sounds. Mostly, I think you should be coaching set for variability in connected text. I think this is the most powerful tool that we have in our box, and you should do it from day one. So here's an example of an older student. He's going to try to read the word patriot.
Per the streets, Alex became
became in the
Alex became
a parrot, a at patra, patriot oat.
Good try.
Patriot?
Nice fixing. I like how you did that. He became a patriot. What does that mean?
I don't know.
It's someone who's So to me, that was really interesting. He came up with patriot, and within a split second, no other prompting from me, I was a teacher there, he flipped into patriot. And yet he didn't know the meaning of patriot. But he probably heard it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known to say it, patriot. So it was in his phonological memory. He's heard patriot, but he doesn't know the meaning. So the lexical or the word-based representation is not that deep, but there's something there. The other thing I like about this is that who's doing the work?
Kid.
The student is doing the work in this one as much as possible. The teacher covered over the back chunk so that the student can break up the chunks. I know this is challenging when you've got a class of 25 or more, but it's the number one thing you can do to help your kids read is to be listening to them, correcting them. And in this case, when we're talking about the set for variability strategy, coaching them to be independent on it. Yeah, Mel is asking if they're an English language learner, it's going to be a lot harder, but they still need to be able to play around with sounds and say, and it's just like when you come up with, when you're reading a Russian word, you know, is this Tchaikovsky? You don't really know unless you've heard it before, but at least you know that you can come up with Tchaikovsky or Tchaikovsky, and then you're kind of left there. Only someone who's going to coach you, or you use other resources to figure out how to pronounce it. And so that's going to be the case with any word. But it is a great opportunity for building vocabulary, as Jennifer points out. So to me, these are some of the easiest steps that you could take. So the first thing to do is if the child reads patriot as patriot and you think they can't figure it out, is just tap the O. So it's a nonverbal. I really like nonverbals because if they're trying to process language and you're talking over them, it's hard for them to do the thinking because there's two language streams, what they're thinking in their head and then your other language. And it just slows the whole moment down. But if you tap that O and they don't try anything, the next level might be, well, what else could this be? You do all that and they're still stuck. Well, then you can say, try I know it looks like O, but in this word is that sloppy try and then the child figures out patriot. So that's a general progression that I think works really well for kids of all ages and even adults if they're struggling with reading. Another thing that I would love to have you take from here is that set for variability is very new. We don't have great intervention instruction yet, other than some of these prompts. So some people are going to start telling you to teach it orally only. But you just also saw that it's highly related to word recognition, more related to vocabulary. So I think it'll be more efficient if you focus mostly on teaching it in the context of print and making them stronger with their sound-based decoding or phoneme grapheme processing. Because remember, we know how kids learn to read. It's a connectionist model, not an isolationist model. If you pull out the phonology only or the semantics only, and you kind of leave behind orthography, you're leaving out one of the most powerful ways in which this skill is being developed. It's really that orthography and phonology part of the triangle that seems to be the tightest connection. So let's talk about this in relationship to the triangle word model. So let's go back to it's in a lot of the studies, the word wasp. Okay, so kids come to it the first time they see it and they say wasp. We've got the semantic, the phonology, and the O's. They're represented in the triangle, this triangle, with those letters. So what if they first realize they come up with wasp and they realize that's not a real word. So they're going to throw that out that they're still thinking. The next thing they might do is think, well, let me try wow, let me try ah, and they try another sound. So they're pulling from their phonological system. And when they do that, they also need to confirm meaning. That's the semantic. So it's not ah, it's ah and wasp. I can think of an animal, a creature, rather that's probably right. And I'm looking at the print the whole time. I'm looking at orthography. And so that may be the steps, but I don't want to make you think that it's like a linear 1, 2, 3. I think it's much better to think of it as the brain is just like connecting things all over, mostly on the left side, very just multiple pathways. And it doesn't necessarily happen in a linear way. So what's required? The child has to have a strategy, a default approach. I'm going to attack this word and I'm going to play around with sounds. That's the strategy. Then the child also has to have the 3 parts of this triangle functioning really at top speed: orthography, semantics, and phonology. It's got to have knowledge and skills in there. And for time, I think I'm going to skip this part. So another consideration for, let me just do one bit of this. Let's do this part. Dr. Mark Seidenberg is very influential for his basic research in reading, and he was helped with that reading triangle that we just showed, and he also wrote Language at the Speed of Sight. And he's been making this case that learning how to read is much less about rules, and it's more about pattern recognition. And we have, as teachers, often mistakenly thought that the system is a lot of rules with exceptions. But he says a better way of thinking about it is not that it's categorical. It's either regular or it's irregular, like boat and got are regular and said and was are irregular. It's not just one or the other, which is a categorical. It's either in or out, yes or no. But it's better to think about it as a continuum. Regular, like got, maybe regular, but it's pretty consistent. Have, said is an exception word, maybe say, and yacht, of course, is a wacko oddball word. So that the brain learns these spelling patterns based on how many times it sees them. It's a statistical process. And so if it's pattern recognition across a number of observations, and guess what you have to have? You have to have a lot of observational data. So we are in a movement now, the science of reading movement. Many of us, either recently or not that recent past, or kicking out the 3 queuing system. And so that was historically a word attack strategy where you're going to put context and syntax way above print. Now we know that that's really wrong. If you're not sure about that, please listen to Emily Hanford's work, especially Sold a Story. So we're not going that way, but now that we are abandoning that, we're swinging over to thinking that everything is about teaching a rule. And Seidenberg and others' research is saying, well, yes, but not yet, not 100%. So I think there's a third way. And I think one of the most important parts of this third way would be to lead with more about flexibility. Yeah, it could be O, and but try ow for Brown. So it's not relying on context. It's not relying exclusively on a rule, but there may be another middle ground where you're going to be focusing more on teaching them the code and then let the child do the work of learning how to be flexible with his or her reading. Also, a suggestion would be that from the very first day, you can coach this set for variability or Flexit strategy. This is one of our first passages in Reading Simplified. We might give to pre-K or kindergarten students. They may not be able to read much of it. We might read most of it for them. And then we get to the word Sam and we ask them to, we read I am, and then we ask them to try to attack that word. And they go, or no, maybe they say same. It's pretty reasonable, right? That's actually a real word. what would we do? I just lost my pencil. We tap the A and say, what else could it be? You're right. It could be A. What else could this be? And maybe they can try A. They're baby beginners. We might just need to give it to them. Well, try A. Now read it again. I am, what do you have? A. And they may be figuring out Sam. So from day one, I'm going to be more eager to throw something at my students. It might be challenging because I'm going to give them the compensating strategies and put them into play for practicing it so they can become independent at it. So you can do this with any program that you're using right now. And I also think I'm throwing out there a little critique on a lot of phonics programs where we're trying to be so highly decodable that we don't give kids an opportunity to try something that they haven't been exposed to yet. They need to develop an innate strategy for trying one sound. If it doesn't work, trying another. It only teaches guessing, Jean, if you're not there to correct. We're going to be relentless in making sure they're accurate. So as a child is taught how the code works, so she's learning that it's and it's and then we got to put them together continuously. Sam. She's developing a sound-based decoding approach organized by what she hears and changing those symbols into sounds that she blends together. That's all phonological or sound-based decoding. She's also learning to recognize word patterns like and am, and words mostly through subconscious pattern detection. But we cannot detect patterns if we don't see a lot of data. We have to see the patterns. So we have to, for variability, you've got to have the strategy. It's got to be a mindset, but then you've got to have a lot of tools at your disposal. You have to have a lot of information. You have to know that it can be a or a. So when you look at the curriculum you have or how you approach your instruction, think about this, are you revealing how our written code works early enough and how it functions? Back to this 1975 when Gibson and Levin said, if we teach them that our language is one-to-one mapping, they're not going to have the skills necessary to attack unfamiliar words. So just as an example, with Reading Simplified, from the first week of kindergarten, we're going to introduce the concept that one sound could be 2 letters, especially could be 2, 3, or 4 letters, as in O-U-G-H. So we're going to put TH on a tile to show that it's one sound in that, and the child can make mat into that, and mat into math. That's going to give them the concept about our language, so they have data to start making observations and not give them the confusing concept that one sound is always one letter. You can also see this in this example, the literacy hill. Claire teaches one sound, the A sound, but it can be multiple spellings. Sail, stay, brave, paint. You can see the same thing happening with phonic books. They have a great collection of sound-based, sound-organized, decodable texts. Here they're focused on the sound. And they're not just teaching ER, it's also UR and EAR. So we're getting a lot of data into the kids' mental bank. And here at Reading Simplified, we teach this a very similar way as this with our decodable text, but we also do an activity called Sort It. So it's one sound O, and then we're going to spell it, and we're going to organize and sort it by different spellings. So we're not just dripping out a little bit of information, just OW maybe, or maybe just the O separated E. That's one way of getting that information more rapidly into the child's experience so they can play around with sounds more. They have more to work with. They need those tools. We showed this earlier again, but Flexit also, that activity teaches the kid that concept. Well, tricky concept about English, one spelling sometimes could be 2 sounds or more. It's a trick. It's a curveball with our language, but there's a way of coping with it. What if we were to teach it earlier to our students? A second thing to think about is, could we give our students can we give them faster access to the code knowledge? So teach them how the code works. Sometimes it could be 2 letters, and sometimes one sound can be multiple spellings, but also don't keep them in that one sound, one letter world for so long. I call it like camping out in short vowel land. How many reading programs spend a whole year or 3/4 of a year just in short vowels? That's not going to prepare kids to handle the variation that the English written code throws at them. So this is not widely done, but this is my suggestion, is what we do in Reading Simplified. As soon as kids can learn how to read CVC short vowel words, they could go into CVC long vowel words, because they're not blending something harder. The only level up is that they have to now recognize that O can be OA or OW or O silent E. So this gets them into the advanced code more quickly, which is actually what most of our top 300 high frequency words come from. Those top 300 words represent about 65% of written English. They don't include a lot of 4 and 5 sound words like help and stamp, but they include words like say and blanking on good example words. But if you want to read a early transitional text like Hey Messy Bessie, Frog and Toad, High Fly Guy, Little Bear, you're going to need a lot of these long vowels. So this just gives more data more quickly, more tools at their disposal. And a second thing to consider is, should we rein in how much we control text? So I really recommend against, for instance, 100% controlled decodable. Like, you can't let them read anything they've never read before. Well, if you do that, you're undermining their set for variability development, aren't you? Because of course they're still going to have opportunity to practice it, because nobody perfectly remembers what they've been taught. We wouldn't all have jobs if it wouldn't, it'd be easier to do our job anyway if that was the case. But nevertheless, it's just going to have reduced opportunities to put it into play if we keep them from challenging things. Every now and again, throw something into their reading that they haven't been taught before. And this is not talking about independent reading, but then when you're with them in a small group setting, you're there to help fix the issue. Because that set for variability is in the learning sciences, I think it's a desirable difficulty when they have to try something that they can't figure out and their brain struggles with it. That's a desirable difficulty. That's when the moment of learning happens. Now, we had a little allusion to this earlier, but some people worry when I'm talking about using cognitive flexibility. People think, well, isn't that the same thing as 3Qing? But keep in mind, 3Qing was really emphasizing, de-emphasizing orthography and minimizing phonology, and really putting so much stress on semantics. And then everything else is just like a whole word approach. We know that that is not a successful model for learning how to read. What we're talking about here with set for variability is including all parts of the triangle. Semantics being one important part, but it's really the orthography phonology line that I think is the leading lady. So do you have this formula memorized? I've gone through a lot of research. You aren't going to remember all the details. Donna says she's going to share the replay. But if your spouse or friend or child asks you, what was that about? You can say, well, I had this one model of decoding that was just learn the letter sounds and blend and then come up with a word. But now I know there's a second decoding step, a second decoding strategy that I really need to look out for. And so I'm going to have this model. You got to know the sounds, you got to blend, and then you have to have set for variability, because you have to cope with the wacky nature of our written code. So as you go from here, look for when your students are doing set for variability and label it in your mind. It'll help you diagnose them more easily. And prompt students to have set for variability mindset. It could be, what else could it be? Don't feel like you have to start telling them all the things about it. See what they can do so that they develop a mindset for, I'm going to go figure this word out. Another thing to consider, this is just my advice based on my experience of reading the literature and broadly, and also having taught a lot, is we could release the code a lot earlier to our students so that they could have more opportunities to develop this cognitive flexibility. And then another super easy thing I think to implement straight away is to just go straight into your text and coach that set for variability left and right. As much as you can be listening to your kids and prompting them to do the work, you help them become accurate, but they're doing the work while they're reading real text. That is so generative, because that little boy who read patriot as patriot, he's not just learning how to read the patriot in that word. He's getting stronger with his sound-based decoding or blending and his set for variability. He's improving the strategy, which is going to help him have a generative opportunity to attack more and more words. So I would love to stick around for questions if there are some. You can also email me. There's my email. And then I have more about feedback on our website if you want to go there, readingsimplified.com/give-feedback. That will just give you some slides where I'm mostly talking about feedback, very similar to what I did today, but a little bit more depth, and then with some hyperlinks to videos to see examples.
Thank you, Marnie.
Yes.
I do have a couple of, I took some pictures, shots of the questions.
Good.
So from early on, first question, how is this, so it was early on in your talk, how is this different from self-correcting using meaning?
Yeah, good question. I think it is relying on meaning, and it's relying on orthography and phonology. Remember that we said that the highest correlation between set for variability and all the other reading measures. Oh, look at my balloons. The highest one is word identification. So it's really, I'm thinking of a word, but I'm processing it with print. It's kind of amazing because we think we're doing something that's very oral, but we as mature readers have had our brains transformed to when we hear words, we don't hear them orally only anymore. They're not just phonological bits of data. Words to us now have been transformed into having orthographic connections to them. And that's where we're headed to make our readers become fluent, is we want them to just process the language that they're hearing so rapidly with print. They can just adjust when they have errors so easily.
Evidence are you seeing, or do you see any that can somehow slow the whole president's momentum?
All right, I'm gonna mute everybody.
Thank you for having me back on. You know how much I admire you.
And Marnie, I'm gonna unmute you. Okay. All right, Marnie, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, here's the next question. Since hearing about set for variability, I've been modeling this as I go. If we are reading a text and the text is available to all, I decide if it's based on the sound example said, and then model the correction. Excited to see all of the science connected to this and ideas linked to strengthening this type of instruction. That was just a comment. Okay, here's a good one. Santina, thank you. What about children from vocabulary deficit backgrounds?
Yes, everything we're talking about is heavily leaning on the decoding word identification strand of the simple view. Oh, do you see those balloons?
I do.
Okay. I put two fingers up and they can come up. So it's heavily leaning on that. And for our native English speakers who don't have a language disability, then that'll be mostly all that you need to do. And every now and then you're going to have to also define, but it's kind of just like the example of the little boy with patriot.
Yeah.
He didn't know the meaning of patriot. So then I stopped the lesson. I said, oh, a patriot is a yada, yada. And actually I didn't have that great of a definition, but that sometimes happens with us when we're teaching on the fly. So, and so your ELL students, yes, you're going to be aware that they're going to have a harder time doing set for variability because they don't have that phonological memory for as many words as a kid who's native speaking.
Right.
But you're still going to go through the same process. What else could this be? Try O or try So you might get on that feedback hierarchy, you might get to the try this more quickly, but I also don't want you to not trust that the student might surprise you. So especially if they're not frustrated, try the least amount of feedback and increase the feedback, but you're always going to be, yes, focusing on the decoding word identification strand of the simple view, and with your students who have poor language for whatever reason, English language, they're going to just need a larger scaffold for vocabulary, but it doesn't mean that they're going to need to go through a different set of processes.
This is here's a comment. This is an improvement upon the doesn't make sense. Did I read that already? Yeah, sorry, never mind. Oh no, I didn't. This is an improvement upon doesn't make sense, general prompt. Here we are helping students make the connections between the orthography, phonology, and semantics by centering attention to the letter strings and initial decoding and outcome of word recognition.
I love it. Thank you. That's so good because in the 3 QA model, we would always just prompt, does that make sense? And then then you're leaving kids without a really clear strategy, and you're not necessarily getting them to focus on eyes on print. This is a heavily print focused strategy. We're not just doing the semantic thing. We're saying, let's look at that. What else could that be? And everybody's eyes are focused on, what is that thing there? That OW? What else could that be? So I like that comment. Thank you.
All right, here's one. I think you may have answered this previously. How would you prompt a student when they flex more than one pronunciation, but they do not recognize the correct one? Do you just jump in with the explicit instruction about the word pronunciation and meaning?
Well, an example would be good, but generally I give the advice to try to, when kids make lots of errors, it's hard to correct all the errors. So I try to rein it back and just try to present one error. So I can't think of so like with patriot, he might have said patriot,
Right.
and that's 2 errors. And so then in a multi-syllable word, I might do the one that I think that's going to unlock the sound of the meaning of the word more rapidly for him. What do you think? Patriot, patriot. I'd probably just go with the first sound in that multi-syllable word because that was wrong, and see if he can fix it from there. Because the whole back to that slide where it's where all the things were happening simultaneously. A lot can happen really quickly. So if I say, well, he's got patriot, I'm just going to tap the I. And let's say actually in this word, this has more of an E sound. So try it again. And he might come up with patri, and he might fix it, or he might still stick with his O, patriot. Then we'll move on to the next error. Okay, we got the first 2 chunks down. Okay, this could be, but that patriot isn't a word I know. You probably don't know it either. Let's see if you can hear a word. If we switch this one, what else could this be? So we just push the error down the line.
So I got a question. Is this flexing to get the correct sound dependent on the student's receptive lexicon?
Yes, I think it is, but I think it's not entirely because of that. Now, this is just 1 or 2 studies, but the correlations that we saw early on, vocabulary was definitely a player, but it wasn't the main thing. There's something about the actual letter strings, the orthography, that is a heavy influence here. So, and this is just 1 study, but other people have found the same thing. The vocabulary is not as much of the relationship as word identification.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think it trips us up because we we're just oblivious to how much orthography has changed our lives.
Right. So but that feeds into what statistical learning is that correct?
Yes.
What Seidenberg is talking about.
Mhm.
So,
Okay, sorry, somebody, the URL isn't working. That stinks. I hope I wrote it right. Thank you for letting me know. I'm gonna look it up while we're wrapping up and see if I can get it to work.
what's not working?
The link to the resources.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I'll see if I can try something about that.
All right. Very good. If anyone wants a certificate of attendance for this and you attended, you're the only ones who will know this because you're on right now. Send me send me a message in Literacy Insiders, and I will have my assistant send you one.
Okay, that is so weird. I typed it once and it didn't come up, and I typed it again and it did. I'm going to put the link in chat if I can. I apologize. Although I can't. Oh, there, it's a group chat. Okay. Okay, you guys let me know if that thanks for being here, Virginia. Virginia Mooney said it's nice to see your face, Donna.
Oh, Jen. Okay. Love that girl. Okay. Oh, thanks. That is so cool. I love getting good messages. Okay, is the back half of the feedback link? Oh, never mind. Thank you, Marnie. Okay, thank you. I'm just looking for more questions. Everything will be included. There is no handout, but the presentation will be available on YouTube, and you could take notes all day long. So it'll all be there. All right, this is great.
Oh, I think Beth asked a good question, if I can read that one. What do you do
Sure.
if the student jumps straight to meaning without fully decoding the word? And you're not sure. Now, sometimes you don't, that's a really good thing to be watching, because some kids are so good at using context that their orthography, their attention to orthography is not that great. So if it's just one word, I'm probably going to do nothing. But if you think their context is just taking over, then a really good way to make sure that they're really attending to print more is to read more words in isolation. And this has been true for me, especially with my dyslexic students who have classic poor sound-based decoding. I've gotten them good at sound-based decoding, but they're still pretty strong at vocabulary and language systems, the other language systems. And so then they can trick me in the context of real reading. And so studying something in isolation is good. And also it's hard to actually, you really never know if they looked at the whole word or not. Like the girl who did guess, I think she looked at the end, because just doesn't lead itself to guess unless you looked at it, but she didn't say it out loud. I just let that ride.
I
But
think she was doing a little contextual.
well, definitely some contextual, but if you look at that, there's no the word was the first word in a sentence and it was a command, so it'd be really hard to deduce it. So yeah, it is possible, Beth, but also what's happening is that all this information can be flying by so fast and the kids can be processing it. And you don't know for sure that they didn't actually see all the letters. But particularly when you have a child who has a habit of guessing, and you really want to be draconian about making sure that they're looking at every sound and not only studying the word in isolation, but also just doing write it, a dictation thing. Let's go back and now let's write the word patriot. That's going to help them really understand the internal structure of that word.
Here was one, it was interesting. What would you have done in this situation? I teach middle school and I had a student who had issues with binocular. But when I gave a clue that someone can use it at a football game with bad seats, they were able to get it. That wanted us to the first something that wanted, they wanted, I can't, this sentence doesn't make sense.
Sounds
So-
like someone, I tend to avoid a prompt that prompts towards vocabulary or prompts towards context.
Mhm.
There are times when that might be helpful, but first and foremost, I want the kids' eyes to be processing all the letters in the word, and then wherever the vowel is that's tripping them up, which usually is just, that's the first thing that I'm going to zero in on. There could be a reason where you want to kind of move back and talk about vocabulary, but if you use that primarily as your first prompt, then they're going to do exactly what Beth was talking about a minute ago, is they might just be becoming over reliant on context, not pay attention to print. And then they haven't actually learned anything from that experience about how to read that word specifically, how to maybe read that phonics bit of information, and how to get better at their sound-based decoding, left to right processing.
I suggested to have the flex the vowel.
Yeah. First thing, usually.
First thing, flex the vowel.
Yeah.
You know,
And
Donna
someone said,
Scanlon, are you familiar with her work out of New York, Donna Scanlon?
a little bit. I think there's
Yeah.
a heavier influence on context than I might have.
Completely. But
yeah.
she uses this, but there's very, very little sound symbol training. And so it's so heavy on set for variability. I don't know if you could do it that way, completely that way.
And I think if Ms. Bernard was talking, if that was related to the person, you know, giving the prompt, there are certainly times when you've got a motivation or engagement situation. And so if you have a discouraged child and you just don't want to put them through the rigmarole of trying to attack the word, then I might just give them the word. Oh, this is binoculars, but I'd still point and tie sounds and symbols. So it's reducing the student's burden, but it's still trying to have an emphasis on sound-based decoding.
Oh, then you can go into a whole nice lesson about bi meaning two, and you know, ocular meaning eye. You know, you could spend hours on that word. Oh my God.
Thank you, Marnie.
All
My
right.
pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Anyone else? Oh, here's a cute one. Santina. 34 years and I find out about speech to print. Could have been worse, Santina. Could have been worse. You could have retired and never have known. I'm winning in my last year. I've seen so much progress. Yeah, with speech.
Congrats, Santina.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Very good, everyone. Thanks again, Marnie. This was great. Super, super good.
Thank
Is
you
it
for
dinner time by you?
what's that?
Is it dinner time by you?
Oh yeah, I'm working up an appetite over here at 6:19. Thanks for staying late.
It's have a glass of wine time for me right now.
Okay, you deserve it, I'm sure.
All right, good night, everyone. Thanks for being here. Oh,
Thank you,
don't
Donna.
forget, we have 2 events coming up on January 30th, sight word instruction, and February 15th and 29th, how to evaluate your writing, your child's writing. So look on our Sound Science of Reading under featured. You will find all the events there and registration. All right, now it's good night. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Donna.
Bye-bye.